Hi all, welcome to the FIDE World Chess Championship match 2024. This is round 13 coverage on the Kingscrusher channel. So here we have Gukesh with the white pieces against Ding Liren in round 13. So e4 from Gukesh. Ding Liren plays a French defense. We have d4, d5, knight c3. And now knight f6. This is the classical variation, encouraging white to advance and close the center. And white does that. So this now is the Steinitz variation, named after Wilhelm Steinitz, the first official world chess champion. We have knight fd7, knight c to e2. So the knight gets out of the way, vacating the c3 square for the pawn, which would support the pawn chain. So c5, c3, knight c6. And now a3. This can be a useful move in certain circumstances. We have bishop e7, bishop e3, knight b6. If black tries to close things with c4, this can lead to interesting positions. Knight f4, knight b6, h4 as example. In this position, white should have a small edge overall. We could also try queen g4 here, and in this position it should be a little bit maybe in white's advantage. Okay, a little bit. But okay, knight b6 is played. Knight f3. Sorry, knight f4, pardon me. C takes d4, c takes. And now this is a very interesting kind of liberational idea actually from black, that quite often the French defense bishop is not doing too much. This French defense bishop is not doing too much. And this next move kind of connects to try and open up the light squares, knight c4. And it looks on the surface, maybe this is a bit scary, because if bishop takes, isn't there d5 at some point? Now, it really should be taken, because if it's ignored, b5, and here, what does white do? Because a3 is under scrutiny. B3, knight takes a3. Is an option for black to consider. And if rook b1, bishop a6, this is possible. Even position. It is actually taken on c4. We have d takes, knight ge2. Now this may be, there was an option here for queen g4, which is interesting to consider. Queen a5 check, and it goes a bit wild, the position, to say the least. Bishop d2, queen b6, where both g7 and b2 are under fire. Let's say queen takes g7, rook f8, knight f3 may be a good move. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop e3, queen takes b2, where white has sacrificed a pawn or two. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A pawn. But white has dynamic compensation here for the pawn sack. So let me just show you a fictional continuation. Let's say bishop d7, rook a b1. And let's say queen c2, rook takes b7, queen e4. Then king d8 is possible here. Queen g4, f5. It goes into very interesting territories here, where black's trying to sometimes use the g-file sometimes, or this diagonal sometimes. Rook e1. So here, sometimes, yeah, the threat is now bishop, if king c7, bishop takes, bishop b6 check will win the queen on e4. Let's say bishop takes c7, there's queen g7, queen takes f6, and it leads to advantage. If rook e8, f7, and this leads to an advantage. So anyway, I mean, this is all crazy stuff. This would be an advantage for white. It's all crazy stuff. If we follow the rook takes f6 line, I know we're in deep. But this position is an advantage for white. So overall, there does seem to be something in queen g4. But if one hasn't researched this position before, it would seem to be a double-edged risk to take to play queen g4. Nigel Short has said, like, the g7 is a problem pawn in the French defence generally. And here, yeah, this does seem, it leads to wild positions, basically. So yes, if we're looking at this position, it's pretty wild stuff. Here with this sacrifice of the pawn in the centre, and then trying to, activate white's pieces. This is a wild position to start off with. Now, why can it easily backfire if black's enabled here? I mentioned rook c7. I assume if the rook moves back, black's got things like bishop c6, maybe even castle queenside and rook g8, targeting g2. So yeah, it's a very tricky double-edged position. So it's understandable that knight ge2 was chosen. There seems to be a kind of thematic promise of d5 at some point, to play knight c3 and then d5 at some point. So b5 is played, both sides castle, knight c3 is actually tried, rook b8, now knight h5, f5. Another approach is king h8. So after queen g4 there's rook g8, and this is a small edge for white. So f5 reminds me of some Cautionoid games where Cautionoid doesn't mind the isolated e-pawn. Sometimes he wants that f-file, semi-open f-file. So we do get a weakling e6 pawn, but is it that exploitable? But we do, black does get the semi-open f-file. So here, queen f3 was played, which may actually be an inaccuracy. So the point of queen f3 is looking at c6. So what would have been an improvement here, at least from an engine perspective? It seems here, taking on f6, check, queen takes, d5. And here, if e takes, queen takes d5, queen e6, rook fd1, let's say queen takes d5, rook takes d5, rook f5. This position should be a small advantage for white overall. Okay, so yeah, interesting. So queen f3 though was played, queen e8. Now knight takes f6 played here, rook takes, queen e2, queen g6, f3, rook f8, rook ad1. And now here, after knight e7, there is actually an unprotected rook on b8. And there's a tactical kind of positional move played here. This is a moment of excitement. So for 100 points, what do you think is a good move for white here? And in fact, if that's an inaccuracy, yeah, rook b7 might be preferable. This position might actually be preferable for black to limit white's advantage. But with knight e7, there seems to be an opportunity made. And it looks, during the live stream, it looks as though, well, maybe Gukesh is going to win the game after this move. So can you see what it is for 100 points? Clever move, bishop f4. So the point is, the rook's hit. If rook takes f4, there's two unprotected rooks. So the key point here would be queen e5, looking at both of them, and winning material. So anyway, after bishop f4, rook b6 is possible. Bishop c7, the rook clings on to b5 here. If rook c6, that hits the bishop. Bishop e5, a6 protects the pawn with a small edge for white only. So rook b7, bishop d6. We have rook e8, and now maybe this is an inaccuracy. Bishop takes e7. It seems here rook fe1, waiting for a5 makes a bit of a difference. At least from modern engine perspective, it makes a bit of a difference. Now a5, it's encouraging a4 at the right time. So we actually take on e7, and then not a4 immediately, but actually knight e4. And here now, for example, a4, this would lead to an advantage for white of some sort. Even if the pawns get dissolved, white's got an advantage here. The knight might have a nice c5 square to play with. And if we look at this again, if b4 here, Knight c5. Again, the knight's kind of good on c5 and d5 is possible. This would lead to a bit of trouble for black for sure with that big passed pawn. So perhaps there's a point to rook fe1. This pressure on the e-file, this kind of authoritative pressure on the e-file, waiting for a5. Now you might think, well, because a5 is the logical thing for the 3-2 pawn majority, but yeah, there are issues around it. So anyway, bishop takes played straight away, and it looks as though, well, why can't white still get a good knight, and also isn't b5 under fire? So we have the pawn protected, d5 here. Now e takes is played, queen takes, d5 check, queen e6, queen c5, rook e8, rook d to e1. So here there's what seems to be more than an inaccuracy, maybe you could call it a mistake, and a counter mistake. So 2 in 2 consecutive by both sides here. So black should, it seems, just consider taking on e1. Now, in theory, getting 2 rooks for a queen is good news, but here, yeah, the knight is quite aggressive, and maybe you could argue white has a small edge here. So anyway, queen f7 was played, and now return inaccuracy knight e4. It looks tempting to go straight in for knight d6 sometimes, but actually taking on e8 makes a subtle difference. For knight e4, it makes a subtle difference for knight d6 being maybe a little bit more effective here. So if rook d7, knight d6, and actually white can establish that knight quite strongly here with a queen on e6. This does seem to be a dominating position to play from. A rook lift could be very dangerous here with rook d4, rook e4, so threatening things like rook e8, check, bishop d7, rook e5, and white should be getting what seems to be a significant advantage here. Even, you know, with this position, it's kind of a dominating central control, centrally positioned pieces. It should be a dominating advantage. So maybe this was the opportunity to win this game. Rook takes e8. This is one opportunity to win the game. It's pretty subtle stuff that knight e4 is not as effective as rook takes e8, if that really is the case. We see rook f8, knight d6, rook c7, countering on white's queen. Queen e5. Yeah, knight takes f7, rook takes c5. This position is just even. So queen e5, we have queen f6, queen d5 check, king h8, rook e5, rook e7, rook fe1. Yeah, if rook takes e7, there's not too much of an issue for after h6 for black. Seems about equal. So rook fe1, we have rook takes e5, rook takes e5, h6, queen c5, bishop d7. Yeah, the knight is attacking the bishop. If a5, white can just take on c8. So the bishop should move. Knight e4, queen f4. We have rook e7. Now bishop f5, queen d4, so a mate threat. Rook g8. Just to put that on the board, bishop takes e4, queen takes g7 is checkmate. So rook g8, h3, queen c1 check, king f2. Bishop takes e4. This seems more sensible than just the bishop retreating. Even if all lines are equal, why not simplify if this is equal with simplification? So c3 now is kind of a useful move to try and head towards an equal rook and pawn endgame. So it would be kind of equal in these scenarios. These turn out to be, you know, quite straightforward to potentially draw for black. So white ignores that rook and pawn ending and keeps the queens on. Queen takes a3, king g3, queen b3. If white has 2 moves, sure, it's checkmate. If white has rook e6, rook takes h6 would be checkmate if white gets 2 moves. Queen b3 stops actually rook e6. Rook e7, we have a5, rook b7, and now another invitation for a rook and pawn endgame if the queens come off. That's ignored. Queen c6, another invitation. This is accepted now. And we do basically, sorry, the queens don't come off. In fact, queen takes c3, rook a7, queen e1 check, king h2, queen b4. This is the invitation I meant. So now this rook and pawn ending, even though it's a pawn up for white, it is kind of looking drawish. So the game carried on like this, and it does look pretty drawish. Okay, check. The king looks as though it's getting advanced, but we have rook c3. Check. And now note there's an h5 resource that has crept in here, which is used. The rook had been controlling h5, but now this resource is used. King f4. It doesn't look too clever if white wants to win this position. Doesn't look too clever. King stranded. So the king stays around, but then there's perpetual check situation. Draw. If king g5 here, yeah, this is also not looking clever. It looks like what we've just seen. Not very clever. So, okay, just to recap, in summary, there were some minor inaccuracies, I would say. Maybe at move 12, queen g4 could have been considered, as opposed to knight ge2. But the big spark of two inaccuracies from both sides was, it seems that bishop takes e7 was another inaccuracy at move 25. Then at move 31, this is the couple of inaccuracies. So knight e4 had been played instead of rook takes e8. And preceding that, queen f7 had been played instead of queen takes e1. So yeah, this position would have been, it seems in theory, safer. But queen f7, yeah, if white had played rook takes e8 here, maybe this was what I consider the golden opportunity. Maybe that may have been missed, to try and establish a kind of octopus knight on d6, where it's like spreading out in all directions. This does look like a very dangerous knight indeed, and the queen supporting on e6 looks like a super dangerous position. Maybe this was a missed opportunity. So yeah, that's the question about this particular game. At move 31, is rook takes e8 a serious winning possibility to try and win? Okay. Anyway, yeah, interesting game. So only one more game in the long time limit to go before the tie breaks, the rapid time breaks. Okay, I hope you got something out of this. Check out my World Championship playlist at Kingscrusher TV /WC 2024. And I have chess courses at kingscrusher.tv. Okay, any comments, questions, likes, shares, appreciated. Any comments at all, just hi there. Great game, what you felt about the game, who do you think is going to win the match now, that sort of thing. That'd be great to hear your comments and views. Okay, thanks so much.